I always thought our life was simple, honest, predictable, in the kind of way that makes you feel safe, even in a world that can be so cruel sometimes. I met Harold when I was 23. He had a crooked smile and a voice like a warm fireplace. We married within a year, moved into a small house he'd inherited from his uncle, and built what I believed was a real partnership. We raised 3 children. I cooked, cleaned, supported him through promotions and layoffs. We made do with what we had. We laughed at game shows together, planted roses in the spring, and always held hands at church. For 40 years, I looked at him and saw the same man, my man. Never, not once, did I think he could be living a lie. The first time I noticed something odd was small. He got a call one evening and stepped outside to take it. That wasn't like him. He wasn't a secretive man. I remember watching his silhouette through the kitchen window, his head low, shoulders tight, but he came back in with a smile, kissed my forehead, and said it was just work stuff. That phrase, it became his shield over the years. Work stuff. I didn't question it then. Maybe I didn't want to, but everything changed on a Tuesday morning. I was sipping coffee, flipping through the newspaper, when the phone rang. A woman's voice, gentle but unsure, asked if this was Harold's wife. Yes, I said, confused. There was a pause, a long one. Then she asked, "Do you know about his other family?" I froze. "Excuse me." I managed to whisper, my throat suddenly dry. "My name is Linda. I've been with Harold for 38 years. We have 2 children. I didn't know about you." I nearly dropped the phone. I remember the cup slipping from my hand, crashing onto the tiled floor, coffee spilling everywhere. I stood there, numb, as the woman on the other end began telling me her story, my husband's other life. In that moment, the world as I knew it cracked in half. 40 years. 40 years of dinners, anniversaries, sick days, laughter, grief, arguments, over silly things, shared dreams. All of it suddenly felt counterfeit, or worse, borrowed from someone else. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Not right away. I listened. That's all I could do. Linda didn't sound angry. She sounded heartbroken too. She said she'd found some documents in his briefcase, papers that led her to our address. She thought he had been working out of town all those weekends, just like I did. Turns out he had been spending time split between 2 entire lives, like some twisted novel. A man with 2 wives, 2 sets of children, 2 completely separate realities, and we never knew. I sat down on the floor among the shards of porcelain and soggy newspaper, and for the first time in my life, I questioned everything. My wedding, my children's names, the vacations, the Christmases. Was it all part of some performance, a game, or had I only known one half of Harold's true self? This story is not easy for me to tell. It still feels like a wound, raw and red, even after all this time, but I think it's important, because too many of us trust with our whole hearts, and sometimes, even then, it's not enough to stop someone from lying. This is the story of how I found out that the man I thought I knew, the man I built my life around, had another family for 40 years, and how I somehow found the strength to stand up, speak out, and keep going. When I look back on our life together before the truth, I can still see so many beautiful things, and that's the hardest part, because you don't build for decades of memories with someone, expecting it all to be a lie. No, you build them because you believe, you trust, you love. Harold and I met in 1971. I was working at a small flower shop in town, and he came in looking for a bouquet for his mother's birthday. He was charming, soft-spoken, had those kind eyes that made you feel like you could tell him your whole life story. I wrapped up a bouquet of pink lilies and daisies, and just before he walked out, he turned back and said, "You have a smile that makes flowers jealous." I laughed. I told him that was the worst line I'd ever heard, but he came back the next day, and the next, until finally, I let him take me out for coffee. We married the following year. He wasn't rich, he wasn't flashy, but he was dependable. He held doors open, remembered anniversaries, rubbed my feet after long days. We bought a modest house with yellow shutters and a creaky porch swing. I remember planting marigolds in the front yard, him hammering away at the mailbox, cursing softly under his breath when the nails bent. It was an ordinary life, but it was ours, and that made it enough. We had 3 children. I stayed home with them while Harold worked as an insurance adjuster. He traveled now and then, weekend seminars, regional meetings, nothing unusual. In fact, I used to pack his suitcase for him, folded his shirts just how he liked, tucked a little note in the pocket sometimes, a reminder that we were waiting for him. I remember the Sunday mornings, he'd make pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse for the kids, or the way he'd slow dance with me in the kitchen when our song played on the radio, even when I was still wearing an apron and had flour on my cheeks. I believed in us, in him. That's what makes betrayal so powerful. It doesn't come from enemies, it comes from the people you let all the way in. And Harold, I let him all the way in. I know now there were signs, moments I dismissed because I didn't want to seem paranoid. A business card in his wallet I didn't recognize, a receipt from a restaurant in a city he never mentioned. Once, I found a key in his coat pocket. I asked what it was for. He said it was for the storage unit. I didn't press. Why would I? He was my husband. He kissed our children goodnight, fixed the leaky faucet, made sure I never pumped my own gas. That's the man I knew, or thought I knew. He loved classic jazz and hated olives. He snored softly. He had a tiny scar above his eyebrow from when he fell off his bike as a kid. I memorized every part of him, every story he told, every ritual we had as a couple. But what I didn't know, what he never told me, was that while he was building a life with me, he was building another one somewhere else. Now, when I go through our photo albums, I see all the smiles, birthdays, first days of school, vacations. I stare at his face in those pictures and I think, was he thinking of them too? Were we his escape from the other life, or were they his escape from us? It hurts more than I can say, but I need to tell it, not just for me, for anyone who's ever looked at someone and realized too late they only showed you the part they wanted you to see. They say hindsight is 20/20, and oh, how true that is. Looking back now, I can almost trace the exact path of deception, like a trail of breadcrumbs I chose not to follow. At the time, though, they were just little things, harmless, or so I thought. A late night here, a drawer that didn't open, a story that felt just a little too polished. But when you've loved someone for 40 years, you don't go hunting for lies. You build your home on trust and hope it never crumbles. The first real red flag came about 5 years before I found out everything. Harold had started coming home late from work, and not once in a while. It became routine. Meetings ran long, he'd say. Or, there's a new manager downtown who talks too much. At first, I didn't question it. He was a loyal employee, always had been. I'd joke, you should get paid overtime just for listening to your boss ramble. He'd laugh, kiss me on the cheek, and say, you're the only boss I care about. But it wasn't just the late nights. He started guarding his phone. I'm not the snooping type, never was. I believed that a person's privacy should be respected. But suddenly, if I walked into the room while he was texting, he'd tilt the screen away. If it rang during dinner, he'd let it go to voicemail. Once, I asked who called. He said, work, nothing important. Then there was the drawer in the guest room. We didn't use that room much. It had an old wooden desk with a few drawers, mostly filled with dusty files and spare pens. One day, I was cleaning, and I tried to open the bottom drawer. It was locked. That struck me as odd. We'd never locked drawers before. I asked him about it later. Oh, just some old tax stuff, he said. Nothing worth worrying over. I laughed. Since when do we lock up boring paperwork? He smiled. Since our grandson keeps using the desk to draw superheroes on everything, I'm trying to keep things organized. I wanted to believe him. I really did. So I let it go. But then came the business trips. Those were even stranger. Harold hadn't traveled for work in nearly a decade. His position didn't require it. Yet, one month, he told me he had to visit the main office in Albany. The trip was last minute, and he seemed flustered when I asked details. I offered to pack his bag, like I always used to. He declined. I've got it. Love, you rest. Rest. That word felt like a command, like he didn't want me too close. I still remember the night he left. He kissed me goodbye in the dark, whispered, I love you, and drove off before sunrise. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, staring at the empty driveway longer than I should have. Something felt wrong. But again, what was I going to do? Accuse my husband of what, exactly? Being tired, traveling for work. We're trained, especially as women of my generation, to doubt ourselves before we doubt our husbands. Still, things continued to shift. He became distant. Not cruel, never cruel, but absent, emotionally. His eyes didn't linger on mine as long. Our conversations grew shorter. He stopped humming when he made coffee. And the intimacy, well, That disappeared entirely. I chalked it up to age, to stress, to life. Then there was the Christmas party. Our son and his wife had hosted it that year. We were all gathered in the living room, sipping cider and swapping stories. Harold stepped outside to take a call. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I peeked out the window and saw him pacing, phone to his ear, gesturing with frustration. When he came back in, I asked, "Everything okay?" "Just work nonsense," he muttered, brushing past me. But later that night, I found a piece of paper in his coat pocket while hanging it up. A receipt from a boutique, a women's boutique, in a town 3 hours away. The date matched the weekend. He'd been working late. The item purchased, a necklace. Not my style, not even close. I told myself maybe it was a gift for our daughter-in-law. Maybe he was surprising me with something different. I waited. Christmas came and went. Necklace, I should have asked. I didn't. Do you see the pattern? When you love someone, you build explanations. You construct stories in your head to keep the peace in your heart. But peace, built on lies, will always collapse. One night, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had changed. And the truth is, everything had. But I had been too afraid to look at it directly. Because what would I do if I did uncover something? I was in my 70s. My whole adult life was wrapped up in this man. Our finances, our memories, our home, all tied to him, to the story we'd built. And if that story unraveled, who would I be? So I stayed silent. I told myself, wait, watch, maybe you're imagining things. But my gut, the one I'd ignored for far too long, was screaming. It wouldn't be long before the truth would hit me like a brick wall. I just didn't know it yet. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that starts off so ordinary, you'd never expect your life to change by dinner time. The sky outside was a soft gray. I was sitting in the living room, knitting a baby blanket for our neighbor's first grandchild. Harold had left earlier, said he had errands to run in town. I remember the soft clicking of my needles, the hum of the old heater kicking on, and the kettle beginning to whistle in the kitchen. Then the phone rang. It was our landline, not my cell, which most people used by then, just the simple cordless phone mounted in the hallway. I walked over, expecting a telemarketer, or maybe our son checking in. But when I answered, the voice on the other end wasn't familiar. "Hello, is this Margaret Walker?" There was a pause. The woman's voice was calm, polite, but uncertain, like she was treading water in a deep, unfamiliar sea. "Yes, this is Margaret," I replied. "Who's speaking?" Another pause. Then, "I'm sorry to call you like this. My name is Denise. I think we might need to talk about Harold Walker." It was as if all the air got sucked out of the room. I clutched the phone tighter, sat down slowly into the chair by the hall table. My fingers went cold. "What do you mean?" I asked. My voice came out thin. I don't want to upset you," she continued, "but I've been involved with Harold for a very long time. I didn't know about you, not until recently. I thought he was a widower. He told me his wife passed years ago." I sat in silence. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I did. You know how sometimes your mind plays tricks on you, tells you to doubt your instincts, your gut, but other times, your body knows something your heart can't accept. My body went still. My heart dropped. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. Not yet. "How long have you known him?" I asked. She hesitated. "Over 20 years." I couldn't breathe. 20 years. 20 years. That wasn't an affair. That was a life. I don't understand," I whispered. "What do you mean, involved?" There was a silence. I heard her swallow. "I'm his partner," she said. "We have 2 children together. Grown now. He's helped raise them. He comes to see us every other week. I swear to you, I had no idea he had a wife. Not until one of our daughters found some old documents with your name listed. I confronted him last week, and he admitted it. That's when I decided to find you." I was shaking now, not from rage, not yet, but from the sense that my entire reality had just come undone. The man I had spent 4 decades with had another life, another woman, children, holidays, photos, memories. I had been part of half of his world. "How do I know this is real?" I asked. My voice was barely audible. "I can send you pictures," she said gently. "Or, you can meet me. I think we both deserve to know the full truth." We agreed to meet the next day at a quiet diner on the edge of town. I hung up the phone and sat there for over an hour, staring at the wall, my hands numb in my lap. I kept asking myself the same question. How did I not know? How did I, a woman who prided herself on intuition, kindness, attentiveness, how did I not see it? But that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't wear a sign. It doesn't walk in through the front door and announce itself. It seeps in quietly, bit by bit, masked as routine, hidden beneath smiles and familiar kisses. When Harold returned that evening, I watched him differently. He placed the groceries on the counter, greeted me with a kiss, asked about my day. I studied his face, every line, every gesture. How many times had I misread those eyes? How many times had he told me he loved me, right before driving off to see someone else? I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to know more. I needed to see her, look into her eyes, and hear the rest of the story from someone who wasn't trained to lie to me. I barely slept that night. My heart was a thunderstorm of emotion, betrayal, confusion, fear, and oddly, relief. Yes, relief. Because for so long, something had felt off. And now, it was no longer just my imagination. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not for her, not even for Harold, but for me. I wore my best blouse, the one with the pearl buttons he once said brought out the blue in my eyes. I tied my hair back, put on my wedding ring, not as a symbol of love, but as a reminder. I had been his wife. I was his wife, and now, I deserved the truth. The next day, I met Denise at a diner just outside town. It was one of those quiet places with chipped linoleum tables and faded menus, the kind where truckers stopped for coffee and pie. As I stepped through the door, I saw her immediately. She was sitting in a corner booth, clutching a manila envelope in her lap. She looked nervous, just like me. We both stared at each other for a second too long. It was as if we were mirrors, reflecting back years of questions. I walked over and sat down across from her. Neither of us smiled. "Thank you for coming," she said. I nodded. I had to. There was a silence between us, not hostile, but heavy, like the weight of two lives colliding. Denise opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photos. She spread them out on the table like a dealer, laying down cards. There he was, Harold in every one. Him standing next to Denise at a birthday party. Him holding a little girl, their daughter, at a park. Him helping a young boy ride a bike. My stomach twisted. The most painful part, he looked happy, relaxed, even joyful. Not the tired, reserved version of himself that I had grown used to over the years. This was a man living freely, and I hadn't seen that smile on him in decades. Denise pointed to the girl in the photo. "That's Alicia. She's 23 now. She's studying to be a nurse." She picked up another photo. "And this is Marcus. He's 26, works in construction, just got engaged." I couldn't stop staring at their faces, because they looked familiar. The eyes, the shape of their mouths, the way Marcus's brow furrowed, just like Harold's did when he was concentrating. They were his. There was no doubt. Tears stung the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Not here, not yet. I can't believe he did this," I said softly. "He has children, a life with you." "I didn't know," she said. "Not really. I believed everything he told me, that his wife had passed, that his only family lived far away. That's why he came and went." "And you never questioned it?" I asked. "I did," she admitted. "Sometimes, but he always had an explanation. He'd leave his phone at home. He said his work needed him to travel. I guess I wanted to believe him." We sat there for a long while, two women tethered by the same man's lies. Eventually, I asked, "Do they know about me? About our family?" She hesitated, then nodded. "They do now. I told them last week. They're devastated. They're angry at him, and confused. But I didn't want to keep the secret anymore. Not after what he did to you, to us." I felt something shift inside me, a strange mix of gratitude and sorrow. Denise wasn't my enemy. She was just another victim. We left the diner with no plan, no resolution, just a shared understanding. When I got home that afternoon, Harold was in the garden, pruning the roses like nothing had changed. He looked up and smiled, and for the first time in over 40 years, I didn't smile back. When I finally came home that day, I felt like I was stepping into a stranger's life. The furniture was the same. His slippers were by the fireplace. The scent of his aftershave still lingered in the hallway. But everything felt different. Everything was different. He walked into the room like nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't been shattered just hours before. He smiled, and asked if I wanted tea. I looked at him, really looked. This was the man I'd shared my bed with for decades. The man who'd held my hand when our first grandchild was born. The man who told me he'd love me until his dying breath. And I asked, how could you look me in the eyes all these years and lie? He paused, mug in hand, and sat down across from me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he exhaled, like it was a relief. I never meant to hurt you. That line, that awful, empty line, I never meant to hurt you. As if intention somehow erases betrayal. I asked about her, the other woman, their children, what he felt for them, what he felt for me, and he told me the truth, or what he claimed was the truth, that it started as a mistake, a fling that turned into something more, that he felt responsible when she got pregnant, that he didn't know how to choose, so he chose not to choose. He gave both families part of himself, but none of us the whole truth. My heart pounded in my chest. My hands trembled, and I could barely hear him over the roar in my ears. 40 years, 40 wasted years, he cried. He actually cried, saying he didn't want to lose me, that he still loved me, that I was his true partner. But the damage was done. I asked him to leave. He refused, at first begged, pleaded, but I was done being quiet, done being the good wife. I told him he needed to figure out what kind of man he really wanted to be, and that he couldn't do it under my roof anymore. He left that night, and I sat on our porch in the dark, wrapped in an old blanket, listening to the wind howl through the trees, and the silence he left behind. Telling the children was one of the hardest things I've ever done, not just because of what I had to reveal, but because I knew it would change the way they saw their father forever. For all their lives, he had been their hero, a steady, quiet man who showed up for every soccer game, paid for their college, and called them on Sunday nights just to say he loved them. He was the backbone of our family, and now, that foundation was crumbling beneath us. I sat our 3 children down at the dining room table, the same one where we'd shared birthday cakes, Thanksgiving dinners, and back-to-school stories for decades. My hands were trembling as I poured coffee into mismatched mugs, the way I always had, but the ritual felt hollow now. The weight in the air was thick. They could tell something was wrong. They knew I'd been quiet lately, but I don't think they ever could have guessed the reason. I began slowly. I didn't want to break their hearts all at once. I told them there was something I'd found out about their father, something I had only just discovered myself. At first, their faces showed confusion, then concern. I explained how I received a strange phone call, how I looked into it, and what I found: a woman, children, photos, documents. Their father had a second life. At first, silence, just stunned silence. I could see them processing, trying to understand. My eldest, Sarah, was the first to speak. "Are you sure?" she asked. Her voice cracked. I nodded, unable to say much more. Then came the questions, hundreds of them. Who was she? How long had it gone on? Did we know the other children? Had he ever tried to leave us? It felt like ripping off bandages from old wounds we didn't know we had. Each answer brought more hurt. My son, Michael, stood up and paced, running his hands through his hair, shaking his head. He lied to us our whole lives. He said, every memory we have, was it fake? I told him no. That was the hardest part. What we had was real. I believed that. I still do. But his betrayal didn't erase the love we had. My youngest, Emily, started to cry. She had always been Daddy's little girl. They'd had a special bond: movie nights, camping trips, silly little jokes they shared. She said she felt like her childhood had been stolen from her. I held her as she sobbed. I didn't have the words to make it better. I only had my presence. We talked for hours. Some of it was shouting. Some of it was tears. At one point, Sarah said she felt sick. None of them knew what to do next. Should they confront him, cut him off, try to understand why he did it? The moral compass we'd grown up with had spun completely out of control. Over the next few weeks, the house became a quiet, grieving place. The children withdrew in different ways. Michael stopped calling. Emily took time off work and stayed with me. Sarah began researching therapists. We were all hurting in our own way. But amid the wreckage, something beautiful happened. My children stood by me. Even when they were confused, even when they didn't know what to believe, they believed in me. They saw the pain I was in. They saw how much I had lost. And they rallied around me like I never imagined they would. Michael eventually came back around. He apologized for storming out that day. Said he needed time. He said, "Mom, I know you didn't do anything wrong. I'm just angry." at him, at everything. Sarah organized family meetings where we could talk about our feelings, cry if we needed to, and just be honest. We started rebuilding, brick by brick, not with him but with each other. And that, in some strange way, brought us closer than we had ever been. We were no longer just a family living in the shadow of his secret. We were survivors of it. And we were healing. The silence in the house after Harold left was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of his familiar footsteps or the low hum of his nightly news. It was the silence of a life unspooling, a future unwritten. Every corner of our home, every photograph on the mantel, every worn armchair, seemed to whisper his name, mocking me with memories of a love I now knew was only partially mine. The initial shock gave way to a cold, persistent ache. It was like a phantom limb, the constant feeling that something vital was missing, even though what was gone was a lie. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of our life, searching for clues I'd missed, for warnings I'd ignored. How could I have been so blind, so trusting? Then came the questions from friends, from neighbors, from people who had known Harold and me as a couple for decades. "Where's Harold been?" they'd ask, their voices casual, innocent. Each question was a fresh stab, a reminder of the public facade we had maintained. I tried to deflect, to offer vague answers about him being away, but the truth was a heavy burden, pressing down on me. I debated whether to tell anyone, but the thought of living with yet another secret, this one, my own, felt suffocating. So, slowly, tentatively, I began to share pieces of the story with my closest friends. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to outrage, but always, there was an outpouring of support. They brought me meals, sat with me for hours, and simply listened as I tried to make sense of the senseless. But the fallout wasn't just emotional. Our finances were intertwined, as they are after 40 years of marriage. Harold had always handled the bills, the investments, the work stuff. Now, I was left to unravel decades of financial decisions, many of which had been made with two families in mind. Lawyers became a part of my daily life, their cold, measured words, a stark contrast to the warmth of my memories. It was a brutal awakening to the practical implications of a double life. And then, there was the other family. Denise and I spoke often, our conversations a strange blend of empathy and shared pain. We were two women, connected by a man who had deceived us both. We found a strange solidarity in our shared victimhood, exchanging stories, filling in gaps, trying to understand the depths of his deception. We even talked about the children, his other children, my stepchildren, in a twisted way. It was an uncomfortable truth, but a necessary one. The fallout was messy, agonizing, and public. It was a crucible that tested every ounce of my resilience. But in the midst of the pain, I also found a surprising strength. I was forced to confront my own assumptions, to redefine my identity, and to rebuild my life, not around a man, but around myself and the unwavering love of my true family. For 40 years, my identity had been inextricably linked to being Harold's wife. We were Harold and Margaret, a unit, a partnership. When he left, it felt as though a significant part of me had vanished with him. The initial weeks were a blur, of grief and confusion, a profound sense of loss, not just for the marriage, but for the woman I thought I was. Who was Margaret, divorced and betrayed, in her 70s? The silence he left behind became a canvas for rediscovery. At first, it was terrifying. I found myself wandering through the house, feeling like a ghost in my own home. What did I like to do? What were my hobbies? My dreams? It was a startling realization that so many of my aspirations had been intertwined with his, or put on hold for the sake of our life. Slowly, tentatively, I began to reclaim the pieces of myself that had been dormant. I started with small things. I joined a book club, something I'd always wanted to do but Harold had dismissed as women's gossip. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with, realizing how much I'd missed their laughter and independent perspectives. I even picked up my old paintbrushes, which had been gathering dust in the attic for decades. The first few strokes were clumsy, but with each canvas, I felt a flicker of the creativity I'd once possessed. My children were instrumental in this process. They encouraged me, celebrated my small victories, and reminded me that my worth wasn't tied to Harold's fidelity. Emily, my youngest, often came over to help me with household tasks, and just to chat, her presence a comforting anchor. Sarah, ever the organizer, helped me declutter parts of the house, metaphorically and literally making space for my new life. Michael, after his initial anger, became a quiet pillar of support, checking in with me regularly and offering practical advice. I also began therapy, a decision that felt incredibly brave at my age. My therapist helped me unpack decades of buried emotions, to grieve the loss of the life I thought I had, and to process the betrayal without letting it define me. It wasn't easy work, but it was profoundly healing. I learned to differentiate between what was real in my marriage and what was a mirage. I learned that my love, my commitment, my efforts were genuine. Regardless of his deception, this journey of self-discovery was not linear. There were days when the grief would wash over me, leaving me feeling defeated and alone. But then there were moments of pure joy, moments where I felt a sense of freedom and possibility I hadn't experienced in years. I realized that while Harold had taken 40 years of my life, he hadn't taken my spirit. He hadn't taken my capacity for joy, for love, for growth. I was no longer just Harold's wife. I was Margaret, a woman who had faced unimaginable betrayal and found the strength to rebuild, to learn, and to grow. I was becoming the woman I was always meant to be, independent and resilient, with a newfound appreciation for the quiet strength within myself. The hardest part about the aftermath wasn't just the personal pain, it was the public humiliation. Our town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets rarely stayed secret for long. Harold and I had been pillars of the community, active in the church, volunteers at local events, familiar faces at the grocery store. When the news of his double life inevitably trickled out, it felt like a spotlight was shining on my deepest vulnerability. I felt their eyes on me at church, heard the hushed whispers in the aisles of the supermarket. Every averted gaze, every overly sympathetic nod, felt like a judgment, a confirmation of my naivety. I imagined them all thinking, how could she not know? How could she be so blind? The shame was a heavy cloak, suffocating me with its weight. It wasn't just the subtle glances, there were the outright questions, sometimes delivered with genuine concern, other times with thinly veiled curiosity. Is it true about Harold? A woman from my garden club asked one afternoon, her voice hushed, her eyes wide with a mix of pity and morbid fascination. I tried to answer with dignity, to maintain a facade of composure, but inside, I was crumbling. I started avoiding places I used to frequent. I sent my children to do my grocery shopping, made excuses to miss church services, and declined invitations to social gatherings. The thought of facing another person, another question, another whispered comment, was unbearable. I felt exposed, stripped bare, my private pain now a topic of public consumption. My children tried to shield me. They were fierce in their defense, confronting anyone who dared to speak ill of me or to pry too deeply. Sarah even had a heated argument with a distant relative who made a snide remark about my lack of awareness. Their loyalty was a balm to my wounded spirit, but it couldn't erase the pervasive sense of shame. The public shame wasn't just about what others thought, it was about the internal battle I fought. I had always prided myself on my integrity, on the honesty of my life. Now, that honesty felt compromised, tainted by his deceit. I wrestled with feelings of foolishness, of having been made a fool. It was a brutal blow to my self-esteem. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, a shift began to occur. I started to realize that the shame wasn't mine to carry. It was Harold's. His actions, his lies, his betrayal, those were his burdens, not mine. I had been the victim, not the perpetrator. The whispers and stares began to lose their power as I slowly, painfully, reclaimed my narrative. I started venturing out more, holding my head a little higher. If someone stared, I met their gaze. If they whispered, I pretended not to hear. I realized that my worth wasn't determined by the opinions of others, especially those who hadn't walked in my shoes. The public shame slowly transformed into a quiet defiance, a determination to live my life with grace, regardless of the whispers. It was a long and arduous process, but I learned that true strength isn't about avoiding the gaze of others, it's about meeting it with unwavering. Moving on after such a profound betrayal isn't like flipping a switch. It's a slow, arduous climb, one step at a time, often with setbacks and moments of despair. But I knew, deep in my bones, that I couldn't let Harold's lies define the rest of my life. My story wasn't over. It was simply beginning a new, unexpected chapter. The first step was forgiveness, not for Harold, not for what he did, but for myself. I had spent too long blaming myself, wondering what I could have done differently, how I could have seen the signs. I had to forgive myself for my own trust, for my own love, for having believed in the man I married. It was a painful but necessary release. I found solace in routine, in the simple acts of daily life. I continued my knitting, joined a local gardening club, and started taking long walks in the park, enjoying the quiet beauty of nature. These small rhythms became anchors in a world that had felt chaotic. I also dedicated myself to my grandchildren, finding immense joy and comfort in their unburdened laughter and innocent affection. Their presence was a constant reminder of the genuine love and happiness that still existed in my life. I also discovered the power of telling my story. At first, it was just to my therapist and my closest friends. But then, as I grew stronger, I found myself sharing bits and pieces with others, not in a sensational way, but as a testament to resilience. I saw the recognition in other women's eyes, the quiet nods of understanding. My story, once a source of shame, became a source of connection and, surprisingly, empowerment. I learned to embrace my independence. For decades, I had relied on Harold for so many things. Now, I learned to manage my own finances, to handle household repairs, to navigate decisions big and small on my own. There was a thrill in this newfound autonomy, a quiet pride in my own capabilities. I even took a solo trip to the coast, something I never would have considered before. It was liberating. Harold eventually tried to re-enter my life. A few months after he left, he called, he sent letters, he even showed up at the house once. He expressed regret, remorse, and a desperate desire for forgiveness, but the trust was shattered beyond repair. I listened to what he had to say, but my heart was no longer open to his words. I had built a new foundation, one that didn't include him. I wished him peace, but from a distance. Moving on didn't mean forgetting. It meant integrating the pain, the betrayal, and the lessons learned into the fabric of who I was. It meant understanding that while Harold's choices had irrevocably altered my path, they hadn't destroyed my capacity for joy or my belief in love, just a different kind of love. The love of my children, my friends, and most importantly, the love for myself. My life is not what I imagined it would be at this age. It's not the simple, predictable path I thought I was on. It's more complex, more nuanced, and in many ways, richer, because in the wreckage of a shattered past, I found a strength I never knew I possessed, and a profound appreciation for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. My story isn't about being a victim. It's about being a survivor, and about finding light even in the darkest of shadows. And that, I've come to realize, is a pretty powerful story indeed.